If you've ever wondered how much a student's choice of college major really affects their chances of getting into a particular college, this conversation is going to open your eyes. I'm talking with Rick Clark of Georgia Tech about something most families don't hear directly from the colleges: how majors influence the admissions process more than many realize. Georgia Tech is one of the most sought after schools in the country, and getting clarity straight from the source is incredibly valuable. If you want a better understanding of how the role of choice of major actually impacts your student and what can give them an edge, you're in the right place, my friends. Let's go ahead and welcome Rick to the show. Rick Clark, welcome to the show. You have been a dream guest of mine for a couple of reasons. One, I would vote you in all of America for the thousands of schools that you are the most transparent person at the college level and the admission side, that you just value transparency. And I'm a believer that families, kids, parents, students need more transparency. And you and I both have a regular practice of encouraging families to have conversations so they can get in alignment. So
Yeah.
welcome.
Well, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that it worked out. And I appreciate the compliment. And I'm going to take that one home to my wife and let her know.
Absolutely, you should. Our families need to hear these
That's
things.
right. That's right.
So, for our listeners who don't know, and I can't believe anybody wouldn't know, you and Brendan Bernard have The Truth About College Admissions. It's a book. I actually call it a handbook. I recommend it all the time. I'm like, just take this, it'll guide you through the whole process as a family. And you have a podcast, and you're very transparent and all that. But one of the things that I've always been itching for you to be giving us a little bit more information about is
Mhm.
this idea of how a student's selection of major plays out in the admissions office. You know, I know
Mhm.
at Georgia Tech, you guys say right there that you're going to look for evidence in the application package with the holistic review
Right.
of the fit for the major that the student listed as their intended major. Georgia
Mhm.
Tech, everybody for the record, you don't, for most other than computer science, you don't
Yeah.
really admit directly to major. They just tell you your intended major.
That's right. We call this FTM. Everything in higher ed has to be acronymized, or however you say.
Right.
And so FTM, in fact, I'm really proud of the fact that we have some faculty who come in and review with us, and they even know this term now, FTM. They're like, I'm not really seeing the FTM here, but fit to major. And, speaking for Georgia Tech specifically, you're right. Like, that's a huge lens through which we review applications. To give you a specific example of that, you have a student who wants to study aerospace engineering, and their high school offers BC Calculus and Physics C. Well, we want to see you take BC Calculus and Physics C. That's going to be a whole different conversation if a student wants aerospace engineering and goes to a school that doesn't offer those classes, right? We're
Right.
not holding them responsible for something they couldn't control. But, let's say another student from that same high school with those offerings is looking to study public policy here. We're going to be a lot less concerned that they have Physics C as an example, because the major that they're applying for is supposed to be sort of lined up with the choices of curriculum in high school and maybe some of the things they've done outside the classroom. So yes, for Georgia Tech, that's sort of how we approach things. And then I think broadly speaking across the country, I want to believe that most, universities are pretty clear. Hey, take Clemson as an example. Like, you want to study nursing or business, like Virginia Tech. I mean, those are going to be different criteria. And so they are admitting, to major in that regard, and that policy is usually pretty clear on their site. So obviously doing your homework, talking to trusted adults around you to kind of steer you through that, and thinking about each individual school you're applying to and how that might be considered along the way.
Well, we did a study. It was at the beginning of 2024, and we looked at the 50 state flagship universities. And we didn't just go to their website. We emailed them, we called admissions, we had conversations, because we were really curious as somebody whose passion is career development and advising for 16 to 25-year-olds. I want kids to have the information to make the right decisions for them.
Yep.
And so in this study, looking at the 50 schools, we put them in three categories. Either they admit directly to major, or they don't, or it was complicated. And its complicated
Like a hybrid, yeah.
category was quite large. There were only four of the 50 who I really like. When I looked at all the language and I talked to them, they were really like, we're not going to really consider anything. They do
Mhm.
less of a holistic review at those schools. It's
Yep.
very easy to change majors. They tend to be, they are less selective schools,
Right.
to be fair. But the it's complicated category, my home state of Ohio, Ohio State's our state flagship. Well,
Mhm.
some majors, yes. And they're going to really dive in, and others it's pre-major and I think too, you talked in your book about how many kids are not sure what they want to do and they're going to go in undecided. And it's a fair number, to your point, that should guide what the right college list is for them, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and something you just mentioned earlier, I think is really important and something that most applicants don't think about when they're looking at maybe schools and majors, and that is change of major policies. And that really, it does sound a little like inside baseball and in the weeds and, sort of something that's way down the road. But I think it's really important, and increasingly it's important because, as you said earlier, most schools are, we construct. I mean, I like to think about the fact that for a student, I really believe it is a college admission experience because it varies between students. And there's a lot of things that they're not going to sort of know or be able to predict. And that's more like an experience than a process. We, however, run processes, and we have constructed processes and policies in order to ultimately create something very specific. And so the Georgia Tech process is going to look different than the, Berkeley process, et cetera. And so I think to your point, that's spot on. This idea that, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And in fact, I told you before the show that I was just talking with some folks from Saudi Arabia, and I get to do a little work with the State Department, going abroad to
Yeah.
embassies and stuff. And I've come to really appreciate like US higher education is just weird. Like it's different, it's super diverse, and that is both a blessing. I'm not going to say it's a curse. It's both, something that we should be really proud of and excited about, but it also can be maddening.
Yeah.
Exactly like what you just said. Like in most other parts of the world, there's no, it's complicated. It's really clear. Now, you might not think it's fair. You might love the way they do it, but at least it's like black and white. And we are always gray in America.
We really are. So this idea of, like, there are schools, yes, you're going to list your major, you're applying directly to that major, but there's a ton of schools that tell us what the intended major is. And like we said, that's other than computer science. That's the case at Georgia Tech. It's what is your intended major? And you're going to be able to make some changes depending on some criteria when you get here, but
Right.
that intention still should have some evidence behind it.
Yes.
So when you do a great job in your book, on the podcast with Brennan, discussing what that holistic review process is. It's not a black and white, do you have this particular ACT score or whatever, but you walk through the different areas of holistic review.
Mhm.
So can we talk about, like, I think families go, well, where would I provide evidence? That sounds so complicated.
Yeah.
And I know it's really not that complicated, but I think they need to hear it from the college side. Like,
Yeah.
where are you, quote, investigating to find the evidence to unearth it?
Yeah, I would say probably three primary places. The first of those, of course, is course selection. Obviously, all students, no matter where you live or where you go to high school, like there are some requirements, right? So you must take certain number of units in certain subjects, and that's locked. But there also is some freedom, especially as you get up into those, junior, senior year in particular. Depends. Some earlier classes have some flexibility, but generally junior and senior year. And so, as a junior, a parent of a junior, I know people just hate to hear that junior year is so important, but it really is. It's such a linchpin for our review being broadly all colleges in America, because it's the last full year that we see, right? And so that course choice, when you have met your course requirements and now you get to kind of pick. So some students, as an example, maybe they're doubling up on science. A student who took chemistry as a freshman or sophomore chooses to take AP chemistry as a senior. Those type of choices that you get to make. Our job in college admission, I mean, the very first question we ask and the way we even sort how we read, this is for, more selective schools,
Right.
is where do you go to school? And that is pretty much question number one. Where do you go to high school? Because we want to understand, what did you have access to? What did you choose to take? How did you do? And how did you do along the way? And as our conversation is specifically relating, how did you do specifically in the courses that are lined up with what you're saying you want to study, right? And so curriculum choices, curriculum trends, curriculum performance aligned with the major is one place. Second place is, of course, outside the classroom, right? So, and you're going to see this naturally if you have a student who legitimately is interested in being an entrepreneur and going into business or marketing, like they've been taking their time to do these things along the way. They don't have to really work that hard to create it on an application. If that's their thing, like they've probably been doing that along the way. And so that could be clubs and organizations. That could have been some of the things that they chose to volunteer or shadow or do an internship in, right? Obviously, people can think of all kinds of other examples. You want to go into medicine and you spent some time volunteering at the hospital, or you shadowed a doctor, or you were participating in this particular club. I mean, again, it's pretty logical, right? This makes
Right.
sense. And the kind of kid who wants, generally speaking, there are, of course, always exceptions to the rule, but the kind of student who wants to be an entrepreneur and into business and marketing, their choices there is going to look very naturally different than that student who has a health care interest down the road. And discretionary time is something we talk a lot about in admission. As humans, we all have limited time, especially as a student, you have limited time. You got to go to school and you got to sleep and you have to eat. What are you choosing to do with that very precious time? And generally speaking, they have been making choices that do align, in fact, with what they want to do. Maybe not singularly, but you can see a pattern. You can see
Right.
some natural interest. And then, of course, the last part would be probably not in the essay. I don't think. It's there sometimes. More
I
commonly,
think kids feel like it should. I see
they do.
very forced essays where I know your guys' heart behind that, the personal statement is like, we just want to get to know you. And having done this work for 25 years, I see kids feeling like they have to show that they're going to solve cancer in the personal statement. And
Yeah,
that, in my opinion, on this side of the desk, I feel like, no, you're missing the mark. That is
agreed.
not what they want.
I 100% agree. I mean, the essay is really more to your point about, helping us to kind of, I mean, if you think about an application, to that point, everything else is just boxes and lines. And you can have two students who, to that point, if you were sketching them in
Mhm.
black and white, right, they would look very similar. They could have done a lot of the same things, have generally the same type of grades, have similar test scores, ballpark. And if you're just drawing and sketching out the caricature of a student, it's really where the color comes in is in the essay. And I think that's how students should look at it, is this is another chapter of my story, but it's a valuable chapter because I get to really color in this black and white sketch that they've been working on. And I would agree, it should never feel forced to have to talk about the things like that you just referenced. When it comes to major and thinking about like what are colleges looking for and how can you sort of put your best foot forward to demonstrate your legitimate interest in a major or a field, that's more so in the supplements. You know, that's really where you find it. We've gotten very, very direct about this. I mean, our supplement literally is, why do you want to study this at Georgia Tech? So it couldn't be more clear than that,
It's
right?
very clear. Yes, it is.
You
Your
know,
wording of it has changed over the years,
it has.
and
It's
it could
evolved.
not be more direct. And you don't want anything flowery. It's just like, why?
Yeah. I mean, you could bullet point that, right? And for
Exactly.
At a place like Georgia Tech, we're fine with bullets.
You're
Um,
like, give me the bullets, give me fewer words to read.
let's get to it. Yeah, so I would say that to answer your question, those are the three primary places that schools are looking to get a sound understanding of a student's interest in a particular field or major.
When you're talking with colleagues across the country, do you feel like that why this, basically, I call that the why this major essay? Do you feel like that is the most popular supplemental, second most popular? Is it sort of the same as why our college, or are they different?
I think they're different. It's a good question. I would love to do your same study
Yeah,
that you did with to know.
maybe we will.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. My sense is that still the most common is just simply why us.
Yeah.
And sure, why us can lean towards major, and of course it might be in there a little bit, but I think the why this with us, right? Why this
Hmm.
major at our place is a great and important question, and it's of course, as you said, increasing in popularity for a good reason because we when when enrollment managers and deans of admission and their teams are creating classes like we talk about diversity, and that's a really big word. That is geographic diversity, that's, gender and ethnic diversity, and that's absolutely academic diversity.
I think
Um,
that's the one that's lost on families.
yeah, agreed, agreed. But
So
it's
explain that a bit to the
well, I
listeners.
mean, we have faculty members here intentionally in all of the majors that we offer. And, certainly Georgia Tech is not all things to all people. I mean, we are not comprehensive. We have 40-ish majors. We started in 1885. We've been very slow to add majors. And the idea behind it is, does the world need it? And do we believe we can do it as well or better than everybody else? And if the answer to both of those is yes, we add it. So 1888, when the doors opened, it was mechanical engineering. It was the most needed profession in the country, highest paid profession in the country. And we added electricals, in 1900 and sort of went from there. More recently, a good example of one we've created is building construction. That's a popular one and one that at least, certainly in our state, it's very needed. But the point there is simply to say, look, we have talented faculty members who are here for a very specific reason because they are trying to create future problem solvers in these fields. And we need to supply them with that talent. So this is why, and you kind of referenced this earlier, like we made a change about a year ago now to restrict computer science because what had happened over time, because of the popularity of that major, is that of our 40-ish majors, 25% of our undergrads were in that one major. That's just not healthy. That's just not, at least for us, that's not what we're trying to be as an institution. Everybody gets to figure that out for themselves. But for us, that's not the vision. That's not the mission. And so, yeah, we said, all right, if you want computer science, you apply directly to it, you're admitted to it, and there's no guarantee that if you get in for something else, you can get into that. Whereas the rest of the curriculum, remains open.
I
Maybe I'm
think
going
that's,
down. Yeah.
well, I think that's a trend that we're
Mhm.
seeing. I mean, we were talking before we started hit record, USC taking business as an early decision, direct admit early decision major. Your buddy Andy Borst, when he was up at Illinois at
Yeah.
UIUC, computer science has been that way. And he was on the podcast before, and he said they were leaning towards, and I don't think it's happened yet, but for business and psychology
Okay. Okay.
because it was over prescribed. Like, so
Yeah.
these are just business decisions,
No question.
and families don't realize that. So,
Yeah.
okay, I have some questions when you go back. I love how you broke out the three, and we may take you up and do that study on at least with the 50
I'd love,
states.
love to see
Well,
it.
because what we did when we did the 50 state flagships admission by major. So you guys before would have been a no, and now you've gone into like it's complicated,
Complicated. Yeah.
right? And in reality, most of them are complicated. Because I even say it's complicated if you say like we're looking for evidence, right, of your intended. The true no's are just like we're not going to look for any evidence.
Right.
Anything's open. is fine.
Yeah.
There's not many of those. But then we gave families, we actually have it on a landing page if they go to our website /majors, and they can get the email template that was like our first, besides looking on the website, looking in the Common App,
Mhm.
the email that we sent to every school and just ask the question, because the reality is not everybody's going to apply to a state flagship, but we
No.
want to arm families with the wording. It can be intimidating. This is why I love what you and Brennan do, because you guys are pulling back the curtain and you're being transparent. When
Mhm.
schools aren't transparent, it makes them feel less approachable to the average family.
Sure.
We both know John Durante pretty well, and he's all about that, right? That's what his whole podcast is, the college admissions process podcast.
Mhm.
He does a fantastic job with that. But giving families like you're a consumer, be wise. Like I bought a car a couple weeks ago. You better. My husband was tired of all the test drives and all the. I mean, he's like, oh my word, make a decision already. But be a wise consumer. So let's do our research and take our time.
Yeah.
Now, going back on this, you and I both always say freshman year, just be a freshman. Get used to the increased rigor, get involved in your school, have
Yeah.
fun. In your book with Brennan, you talk about, hey, 12 to 20 months before you're submitting your application,
Mhm.
which now is going to really take us into second half of sophomore year.
Right.
Is that right? Am I saying kind of
I
like,
agree.
would
Yeah.
you guys like, so that was my question. Like, when you're looking for the evidence, what time point are you pinging back to? It's
Mhm.
not freshman year?
I mean, I think this is one of those things that is a changing answer. I can think of a number of colleges now who are starting to factor out the ninth grade from a GPA standpoint. They're no longer even calculating
Mm,
that. I think that is very much about the boy problem that we sort of have, and generally speaking, I can say this as a parent of both a boy and a girl. Boys sort of catch on a little later. And so I think a lot of universities are realizing like, hey, if we don't factor in or don't focus that much on a 14-year-old and worry more about these latter kind of parts of the academic career, that's going to change how we, review and make decisions, and probably it's going to change the composition of our class going forward. What I would say is that is also to an extent true for, outside of the classroom, right? I mean, if you have a student who got their feet set, maybe did, like you said, a couple things to plug into the community as a freshman in that sophomore year, like, okay, they've had a year to just like get set, get their feet both planted firmly. They're part of the community now in high school. You don't have to have it all figured out, but like, let's dig in a little bit more. And in our book, we do talk about these three I's, like involvement, doing stuff, right? Tell me if I'm getting too technical with my
no.
language. you know, Influence and impact. And when you think about influence and impact, like that normally is not happening as a freshman. Let's be honest. Like, it's in those sort of sophomore, junior, senior year where, we can see that, like the things that it's not always about like holding positions or stuff, but like you're really the things you're doing, like there's depth there. We talked
Hmm.
a little bit earlier about this concept of depth and impact. And they're starting to actually show a college this is an interest, but also like demonstrate. And this is a question that we often talk a lot about is, will this student be missed? Right? When they leave, will they leave a hole in their school, in their
Yeah.
family, in their community? And that usually is really starting to be clear in that sophomore, junior, senior year. So I do kind of stand behind that idea that this idea of like photobombing the yearbook and getting involved with everything as a freshman is and strategizing on how that's going to look. I mean, so little emphasis on that ninth grade year.
Yeah, I love that. I think the timing is right, but then you do still have, even with sophomore families, well, my kid's resisting me, or they don't want to get involved, or and it's like there are very real deadlines. You mentioned earlier, other parts of the world, you know, they funnel kids in from a very young age.
Yeah.
And when people complain about the fact that they've got deadlines around selecting majors and these other things, I'm like, are you kidding? we give so much more freedom
Right.
in that. But the reality is, there are very real deadlines coming.
Mm.
Parents are, as somebody who just finished paying for college a year ago for my
Yeah.
youngest, you're
Congratulations.
thank you. I know. I thought I was getting a pay raise, and then our daughters both get engaged at this.
Somehow
I'm
that
like,
didn't play out. Isn't that the way it always is? Like,
it is. I like there's no additional money yet.
yeah.
One of these days. And so, but there are very real deadlines and you're getting ready to make an investment. And
Yeah.
so even as a parent to ask for your teen to start to demonstrate
Hmm.
that they're serious about the investment that you're getting ready to make, I think is important.
Hmm. Sure. No question. I mean, but I can't tell you how many applications we read where it's like you see a student who freshman, sophomore year, they did something, right? And then you can see that there was this other thing they did all 4 years and this other thing they did just one year. And, I don't know. To me, I think like that's where it's good to like look through layers, like
Hmm.
involvement, impact, influence. And the truth is that we're not really bean counting the number of things you've done. Like the bigger, I mean, when you're talking about a more selective place that has choice of many applicants, it's not about like this many years checking the boxes. Like, what did you really do? And who are you going to be on our campus? So I think if I'm a parent of a freshman, which I do have an eighth grader actually, as she goes into her high school experience, like I stand behind it. Take a breath, encourage them to just be a good student and be a good community member. And that's going to look different for different kids, but like not do this because it's going to play out this way in the future, but do this because this is about, exploring, contributing, like being a good community member. That's going to always be of value.
By the way, I'm going to steal you and I both do conversation cues for family alignment. I'm stealing one from you today.
Okay.
It's going to be, what hole will you leave
Yeah.
in your school? Like you've got to be able to answer that. But it also, you said you're talking about selective institutions. I'm thinking about a student that I worked with over the last couple years, and he was applying to, I'm not going to pick on the school, to a moderately selective university,
Mhm.
to one of their more selective majors, in demand major at that school. And I said, academically, he was one that resisted taking AP classes, took his first AP and played it safe with the AP that he chose because, as
Mhm.
you and I know, not all APs are created equal. So he did a lesser demanding AP senior year. And I said, if you don't get in, and I said, these were choices you made long
Yeah.
ago before I met you, it probably will come down to some of the rigor choices that you made sophomore and junior year. And I'm like, but you've got great essays and you've got, this is one of my career development kiddos, and you've got a great resume because you curated, we call them curated experiences. So we even would throw into there like, not just coursework at school, but if you expressed intellectual curiosity by taking something outside of school, like a Coursera course, even if
Mhm.
it's one of
Yeah.
the for free ones, right?
Yeah.
Job shadows, internships, volunteerism, anything that was curated that you put into that middle category. I'm like, but you're
Right.
really good here. He ended up getting into this school that I kept holding my breath. I was like, oh gosh, oh gosh. And I hear from him on a Friday afternoon. No
Mm.
teenager's going to contact you on a Friday afternoon unless there's big news.
Right. Sure.
And he got in, and I know other kids' profiles that were also applying to that same major, same
Mm.
school. They had some of the rigor, but they were lacking the
Mhm.
curated experiences that
Mhm.
aligned with the fit for major. And this was a
Yeah.
direct admit major. So I think that I know that it matters as well.
No question. I mean, just, obviously the ability to do the work and the preparation is critical and schools are reviewing that, but aligning that again with what have you done outside the classroom and are those two things complementing one another is invaluable.
So you and I know we get people that push back on both of us about like they're not even as a sophomore or a junior, like I just can't get them to do it or they haven't done anything. Or there are also kids who think that, and this happens a lot with the kids that I'm working on the career piece with.
Okay.
So it is a career that could be a good fit, and I don't believe in soulmates, not My husband knows I don't believe in those. And I don't believe in them for careers. I don't think there's one thing. Like you and I both
Yeah.
could pick jobs that we would love and be good at if
Mhm.
if we both have been doing what we've been doing for a very long time, but we would be successful and happy doing something else.
Agreed.
So there are multiple options, and ultimately you have to pick a major, you have to pick a career path,
Mm.
and they start to get some experiences. And when they get up close and personal with some of them, they go, "Oh, I learned something that's a deal
Mhm.
breaker." I think of one of my former students who did a IT internship with Kroger. Kroger's based here in Cincinnati, and he was like, "Whoa, no, I don't want to do this." But he got
Yeah.
exposed to the finance department through that project. And but this was not until he was going into his senior year. So he didn't
Mhm.
have as many aligned activities. He
Yeah.
had good activities, but he didn't get clear really on the major piece until going into senior year. What would you say to parents or students who have concerns in like that kind of a scenario?
Well, I'd say that's awesome. I mean, as you're telling that
Not a
story,
failure.
first of all, that really resonates with me here at Georgia Tech because, we have I don't know if this is actually statistically still true. For a long time, we had the largest voluntary co-op program in the country. Maybe or maybe not still the largest, but it's a very robust, big co-op program, internships, et cetera. And we talk to students about this all the time. You've been told all your life you're good at X, you're good at Y, your mom did this, you should go do this, whatever. So some kid goes over to Coca-Cola, right, which is literally right next door to our campus, and they think they're going to do international marketing, and they get their internship or their co-op and they hate it. Well, that's great news. Like that's great news because you just figured out, as a talented student and frankly just as a relatively, like dynamic human, we have to close doors too.
Yes.
Part of clarity is closing doors. Part of focus and motivation is closing doors. So what I would say to a family, let's say, or to that particular student, if I could rewind the clock, I would say, this is great. Because you know what? Yeah, all right. We talked through three different areas of what colleges look at. Maybe or maybe not the curriculum lines up. It sounds like maybe the outside the classroom stuff isn't going to be as pointed as you thought it might be. But guess what? In your writing, you get to write something very real. In that supplement, you get to say, the reason I'm applying for this major at this school is because I did this internship. I thought I was going to do this, and I've already realized it. You're ahead of other students. Like, that's a good thing. So I think, gosh, I hope that for my own son and daughter. Like, I hope they have that experience where they go do something they hate, where they're like, perfect. I thought that was for me and it's not. Like, I get to reorient here.
Yeah, we have to celebrate those because the kids, they'll look at them as failures a lot of time. I'm like, no, that's a huge win. As long as there's a lesson learned, it's not a failure. But so what I love about your response is, okay, and you guys talk about pointy students in your book. So again, if I
Mhm.
haven't convinced everybody to read it and get it at this point, hopefully that's another plug for it. But they're not going to be pointy on that extracurricular activities piece, but they have an opportunity to express it either, in a supplemental essay. We always remember there's the additional information section, which a lot of our listeners, they
Yeah.
aren't to the point where they've started a Common App account, which by the way, people, you can start it anytime and go in
Uh-huh.
there and look at what they're asking of your teens. But there is an opportunity. And by the way, that kid, he landed at Michigan, and Michigan's a fantastic selective school, and he got into Ross direct admit
Mhm.
into business. So he was able to express it, but I wanted to hear from your vantage point where you guys sit at the admissions piece, like how you handled that.
Yeah, and okay, so he's not pointy in all of the things being singularly directional, but he is pointed in his writing, and that can be equally valuable, right?
Yes, that's an amazing way to put it. Okay. Well, this has been great. Is there anything that you want to add when it's, the specific like admissions, how you guys look at fit to major? Did I miss anything?
The only I'm working on an article slash something right now called Flexibility is the Future. And it's sort of like talking a little bit about colleges. I really think that, healthy colleges in the future, and future being like in the next decade, are the ones that are going to create lots of different entry points to
Mm-hmm.
their university, not just fall freshman kind of thing. Similarly for students, I think the more flexible you can be, the more sort of seeing college as a big word and saying, you know what, it doesn't always mean this way. Like is a great way to like approach things. In other words, this is something I want to study, or I want to study this at this particular place. Well, you know what? I might not get to do that as a fall freshman, but there's a transfer option. There's a second layer of review. There's a way I can actually end up arriving at that, if I can expand how I, not only present myself, but like approach this whole experience. So I think that flexibility going forward,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you know, more and more schools are saying, yes, if you start in the summer. Yes, if you start in Europe. Yes, if you do the Verto plan in Spain, So I think this idea of like flexibility to arrive at goals is only, I mean, choices and options, like that's winning. And I think that the more kids can put themselves in a position where they have choices and options, the better off they're going to be.
Well, I think that's a great point. Like if you're focused on, oh, it has to be Georgia Tech or Ohio State or Michigan, shouldn't put those two in the same sentence, really.
No, right? Dangerous.
Yes. But if it's about the school and they do have your major, there are usually different things that you can do to work on it. But if it's about something else, you would be just as happy, which you and I both know that most kids are going to find with all these options
No
another
doubt.
place that they're going to be very happy. So
Always, always.
usually just go ahead and double down on where you can get in.
Hmm.
But flexibility of that just helps everybody in life. Flexible people, I think, are successful people. And,
Yeah.
as I work on career development, it's about really like how are you going to be a good employee? How are you going to add value? And
Hmm.
flexibility will serve them well there too.
No
So,
question.
Rick Clark, this was fantastic. Thank you for making time.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
It was great. Thank you.